I'm excited to have my friend Alison Pidgeon here on the podcast. I'm pretty sure you've done a few shows with me here, other podcasts. We have a lot of fun together. So, for those of you who don't know Allison, let me tell you a little bit about her, and then we're going to jump into the episode. Allison Pidgeon is the founder and CEO of Mood Forward Counseling, a statewide private practice in Pennsylvania. She's a serial entrepreneur. This is very true, having several different businesses, also has a real estate investor business. She lives with her three boys in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and proudly drives a minivan to soccer practice. Love it, Allison. All right, girl. So maybe we should talk a little bit about how we know each other and our history, and then we're going to kind of talk about all the growth you've had since we've known each other. Because wow, wow. In fact, how many locations do you have right now for Move Forward?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, Whitney. It's always fun to talk to you. Yeah, we have 8 physical locations right now.
Hey,
Hmm.
love it. Love it. Great. All right. So Allison and I, we met in 2018, 19, 19,
19, yes.
19. And at that time, you had one location, right? Is that right?
Yeah, just one.
Okay. You had like what, 12, 14 therapists maybe?
Yeah, about 12.
Okay. So now we're hanging out, what, 6 years later? Six and a half maybe. Where are you sitting now?
Yeah, we have 85 employees, 65 therapists. We built out a whole leadership team. We opened a bunch of physical locations as the pandemic was winding down. So we've grown exponentially in the past, really just since the pandemic.
Certainly. Wow. I'm sure people are like, whoa, right? So
Mhm.
Allison knows how to do it. So today we're going to jump into this idea of how do we grow to a seven-figure practice and not just doing it, but doing it well. Because so many people, I don't know what you've noticed. Actually, let's just start with that. What are you seeing as some of the maybe pitfalls that you see with people going to seven figures? And then we can kind of talk about how to do it sustainably.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I see is people not delegating enough and not realizing all the different folks they need to hire to grow and handle the volume of not only the employees, but also the clients. So I think a lot of people start, their practice and they add a few clinicians and then they grow to 10 to 12 and they can still kind of all manage it themselves. But once you get, to be 15 clinicians, it's a whole nother thing that you have to do in terms of structure and leadership and delegation and all of those things.
Certainly. Yeah, I see people just grow too fast, right?
Yes.
Especially, I can see this more with insurance-based practices as they get on as many panels as they can and they just start hiring a bunch of people, not being as intentional as they need to be. And then it kind of becomes this like out of control monster of a
Yep.
practice that they don't know how to manage. So do you see
Yep.
that too?
Oh, absolutely. And then people don't do their research to understand how much they can pay their people. And they just think, like, well, I'll just pay them as much as I can because then people want to come work for me, but then they're making no money and they're burned out. So it's, yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah, so I'm curious, when you started your practice, did you think to yourself, I want to have this huge group practice one day, or I want to make this specific amount of money? Like, what was that like for you? And maybe looking back, like, wow, are you surprised, or you were like, I'm going to do this?
No, I had no idea. I think I had that vision in mind of like, I'm going to have my 10 to 12 clinicians and then I'm going to be making $100,000 a year, which sounded like when it was double what I was making when I worked in the agency. So
Yep.
that sounded amazing. So I just thought, yeah, that'll be great and I'll stop there. But then we got to that point and it was like, this is great. The clinicians are happy. We're creating a really great work environment for them. The clients are getting better. They're really pleased with our services. So it's like, why not just do more of this? So we just
Hmm.
kept building from there.
I can relate to that feeling. Yes, so let's talk about how do we actually go to seven figures? How do we sustainably grow? And I know you've got all the tips, so let's just kind of go through each one of them.
Yeah, what I tell people when I work with them doing business consulting is like really think about what you want your end goal to look like. So, if you want a multi-state practice with hundreds of clinicians, we're probably going to make a different plan than if you just want to grow to like 30 clinicians and two locations. That's a very different model. So, if you know what that end goal looks like, then that's great. And if you don't, that's okay too. We can still kind of work around it. But I think just kind of understanding, like at certain numbers of clinicians, what you need to add or what you can afford to add. And I think along with, obviously working with your accountant or whomever advises you on your financial stuff. But, I think a lot of people wait way too long or they to add a position or they hire somebody that's maybe not necessary. Like, I think one of those like really key things to hire earlier on is HR because there's always HR stuff that you have to deal with. There's always, just, yeah, there's just always a lot of HR work to do. And so for us, that became like one of the first like positions we hired for because that was a big chunk of what we were doing.
So it sounds like a big part of it is figuring out where you want to go and then who you need in the right seats to get there.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about HR and maybe we can talk about some of the other components too. But when did you or what when do you recommend that you hire an HR person? Like, is this someone for your practice or are you hiring out a company or kind of what does that look like?
Yeah, we used sort of a fractional HR person from a company for a long time, but we kind of kept running into issues with that. And just the job grew to the point where, like, okay, now it makes sense to hire somebody, let's say part time to do all this HR work. And then we got a little bigger, and then it was like, okay, now it makes sense to hire somebody full time to do all this HR work. So that was kind of the progression that we went through. And I think that's pretty typical for business. And I think the other, just going back to what you were saying about, kind of mistakes people make or where it's hard to know like how to grow, like I think there is definitely a process where it's very normal for a business to like hire out and use another company for things. And then you don't always realize when you get big enough to, hire a part-time person or hire a full-time person to do that job. And so there is, you can do the math and kind of figure out like, well, when does it make sense to stop using this billing company and, bring the billing in house and how much does that cost and versus what am I paying the billing company now and all of that kind of stuff. So, and I think too, a lot of times people think it's got to be like all or nothing. Like I either am using this billing company or I have like this full-time biller. Well, there's, an in-between step in there too if you need it to be that way.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because there are a lot of in between steps at any phase of growing your practice. Like I think
Hmm.
about part-time people answering the phones when I was small, and I had
Right.
interns that worked part-time and then therapists that covered part-time, things like that. But I am actually very curious more for my own sake. When did you hire an HR person?
It was during the pandemic, which my memory of that is pretty fuzzy because it was such a stressful time. But I imagine it was probably 2021. So we had contractors the first 5 years. We switched them over to be W-2 employees at the beginning of 2020. And then because of the pandemic and the demand going through the roof, and the fact that we were now offering benefits and all of that kind of stuff, we just really started to grow exponentially and we're much able to hire much more easily at that point. So we were hiring more quickly, and then that's just more and more HR stuff to do.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Yeah. Okay. So I'm guessing we kind of touched on this hiring. Like staff hiring, therapist hiring, the types of therapists in your practice. I'm guessing this probably contributes because unfortunately, the world of therapists, the turnover is rough.
Hmm.
So I would love to hear more about how do you hire well, sustain therapists that you can grow to seven figures.
Yeah, I think definitely W-2 employment with offering competitive compensation, good benefits is a big key. I think having a good culture is a big key to retaining people. I think therapists aren't always money motivated. They want to work at a place where they feel supported, where they, like their boss, where they feel like they have good relationships with their colleagues and their teammates. I think that goes a long way as well. I think something also that is important to my clinicians that I've heard is like, because we are clinicians running the practice, we make sure things are being done ethically and legally within the, bounds of our profession. And I think, there's like here in Pennsylvania, you can open a practice and not be a clinician. And so, I think it's really important to them that we're clinicians and that we're doing, absolutely, like even if it costs more money, we're going to do it in the most ethical, legal way that we can. And we're not going to skimp on that. So I think that's really important to them. So yeah, so I think those are things I think, we're still figuring that out as well. Like we just added a position, a therapist that works for us who's like our engagement specialist. And so she's going to figure out ways to help retain therapists longer. The average industry averages therapists stay at one place for 2 to 3 years. And ours, we calculated ours, it's about 2.8 years. So we're trying to figure out ways to extend that
Mm.
because turnover costs a lot of money.
Yes, it does.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good statistic that you're tracking there. Yeah, I recently created a whole spreadsheet that was like, here's every person that's worked here, here's when they left, here's why they left, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I don't know if you would agree with this, one of the challenges is, are they actually telling you the real reason they're leaving or not?
Yeah.
But you
Yep.
can't assume, and you'd like to think we're all therapists, aren't we honest? But,
No.
the best we can. Yeah. Another thing that I changed recently that I feel like is, and it's recent, so I can't say I've like had enough time to know exactly how good it's going to go, but we redid our values. We have values, and then we were like, okay, I think these are some different values, and we really need to hone in on like describing these. And then we started using those more in our hiring process and really
Mhm.
talking about who we are in the interview process instead of just getting to know the person and being like, oh, they seem great, whatever, really giving scenario questions and looking at values. And I think that's really helping us hire people more in alignment.
Yes, we've done that for a long time.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
have you noticed a difference when you started hiring with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, because basically it's repelling the wrong people and attracting the right people. And I
Mhm.
will be very clear about, like in our practice, one of our values is, diversity, inclusion. Like it's a safe space for everybody. Like, like that's just what we're all about. And like, if that's not who you are, then like, please show yourself to the door,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. What else do we need to be thinking about when we're talking about wanting to scale to seven figures?
Yeah, I think the delegation piece is so huge. I think people get all tripped up on delegation. Like, how do I do it? How do I know they're doing the right thing once I give them this task to do? All of those kinds of things. And there's so much to that. I'm not sure, like, that's something we can cover in this conversation, but I think like really figuring out what are things that you're good at? What are things that you really want to be spending your time doing? And everything else, should be delegated to somebody else. Like I didn't realize until I hired my COO, like I can do all that stuff, but it's very tedious for me and I don't enjoy a lot of it. And then I was procrastinating, so I was becoming like the bottleneck to making things happen because I was like, I don't want to write a policy procedure manual. That sounds terrible. So like as soon as I hired her, I was like, here's all the things that I don't want to do and I've been putting off. Like, what do you think about doing these? And she's like, I love doing that stuff. And I was like, this is amazing. And she's like, gets it done quickly. She's, you know, super competent and just I totally trust her to do a great job. And like it's just amazing like how much we grew. The first year she came, our revenue doubled. And I really think that's because she like jumped in and did all those things that I was procrastinating about. And we're just like a really good like match in terms of our strengths and weaknesses.
That's great. I think a lot of people, a couple of thoughts here. Group practice ownership. This has surprised me as I've grown. I always thought, oh, well, the more I grow, the more money I'll have to invest in things, but that's not always the case because you have more people to pay, more. expenses, that kind of thing. So I think it makes it hard to make decisions on what to invest our money in, what not to. Do I have enough money to invest in these things? Like, I think a lot of people are probably listening going, do I have enough money to hire a COO? That sounds like a really good idea. But then you also just said that I'm gonna might double, or you did. Like, do you have
Yeah.
any advice or questions, thoughts for people to be asking themselves when they're like, do I have the money to bring on these people or to do this thing?
Yeah, the way I think about it is like, again, there can be sort of an in-between phase, right? Like you can like I hired my COO, she was a clinician, so I said, like in the beginning, the first year, you're going to have to see some clients because I can't cover your whole salary without you generating any revenue. I said, but then after we grow to, a certain size, we can have you, because she didn't want to see clients anymore. So I said, we can have you not have a caseload anymore. And she was okay with that. And so, yeah, there was sort of a in between transition time for like a year where she saw clients half the time and did that work half the time. And that helped to get us to that point where we didn't have to have her see clients anymore. I also couldn't really pay her what typically a COO makes. And I said, like I can pay you this salary for sure. And like if the practice makes a profit, I said, I will share it with you. And we worked that out. Obviously, everything is in writing. And so she knew like, okay, if I meet, these goals and help the practice in this way, we're going to make a profit and then I'll get a share of that. So I think that was also a really great way of just kind of getting started because I think a lot of times we think like, oh, I'm going to hire the COO. I need to like magically have this $100,000 salary to pay this person, but you really don't. You can kind of figure out a way to make it work for the practice so that you're not putting like a huge amount of money up front. On the other side of the coin, though, too, is that you have to sort of invest some money and you're gonna have to maybe see your, revenue go down a little bit, maybe for a period of a few months to make that investment to get to that next level. And I think that's scary for people. But I think, you really that's the only way you're going to get to the next level. You can't keep doing it all yourself. So kind of
Yeah.
tolerating that discomfort for a little while. And I think too, just asking your accountant, like in the beginning, I was like, I want to hire this person. I have no idea if I can afford to pay this person's salary. Like, can we run some numbers to see what this looks like? And they were able to do that for me. So that made me feel more comfortable too.
hmm I've done that before as well. It does really help.
Hmm.
hmm Yeah. I'm even just kind of reflecting. We just had our best month ever at Water's Edge in October, and I definitely just spent the most money I've ever spent on consulting the months leading up to it, right?
Hmm.
And so it just kind of shows that you do a bunch of different things, or I now have more leadership team members. I'm paying them more, and that really does make that difference. You got to take those leaps of faith, to be able to kind of get to where you want to be.
Hmm.
Any other tips that come to mind when we're talking about scaling?
I think a lot of times people think like, oh, the more clinicians I add or the bigger I get, the more work that's going to be for me. And that's the actual opposite that I found. I found that it's actually less work because I can now hire all these people to do all the things that I used to do. So I actually work less than I used to, which is really nice. And I'm finally like at that point where I feel like I'm just doing the things I really want to be doing and I've delegated everything else. And so that's a constant, you know, sort of revisiting like every few months, like, what am I doing? What can I give to somebody else? Like, did something land on my lap that I don't really need to be doing? That kind of thing. So I just talked to somebody yesterday, actually, who has 30 clinicians, and I told her I had 65, and she's like, oh my gosh, this sounds like so much work. And I was like, actually, it's not really any more work than 30 clinicians was. It's about the same. So
hmm
I think that's something to keep in mind too.
hmm I think that's such a good point. And it really does go back to obviously getting the right people in the right seats, because that is what allows you to step back. And then, gosh, when you have an employee that's not well, especially if they're not, in a leadership role or something, it does take up a lot of our time.
Yeah. And having really good systems too. Like we have really great systems. We have, bonus structures in place to really like maximize the jobs that people are doing. So they're, going above and beyond to do their best work, and that is helpful too.
Yeah. Is the bonus structure for anyone in the practice or just for therapists?
Anybody.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really great. And once you implemented that, did you notice a difference?
I think I definitely see people who are motivated to get the bonus. I think especially our billing and our admin departments are motivated to get the bonus, and they have actually figured out, like, especially the admin team who does all the scheduling have figured out like how to work together as a team to like capture all the inquiries and get people scheduled and that kind of thing. So that's been really cool to see.
Nice, nice. So going back to you feel like you work less, I would love to hear more about what does Allison do in a typical day running Move Forward and how much time is it and how do you enjoy it?
Yeah, so I have 3 direct reports. So I meet with them every week. And then mostly what I do now is anything related to like new programs or expansion. I run what we call the efficiency committee. So we meet every 2 weeks with all the department heads, and anybody can bring to the table like, hey, this process is broken, or, we're implementing this new thing, but we didn't think about X, Y, and Z. How are we going to make this work? That kind of thing. So I really like doing that. It's fun to see like us making progress and how we can make things more efficient. And yeah, it just sort of depends on what's happening in the practice. Like I end up kind of getting involved in different projects, so to speak. And then I also do 2 leadership retreats twice a year for our manager level on up, because I feel like it's important for them to continue to have, leadership training. We also do what's called a state of the practice address twice a year. So we talk to the staff about how the business is doing, our goals, if we've met our goals. I share with them the budget, like how it's looking from a like percentage standpoint. So
Mhm.
they appreciate that transparency into how the business is doing. We started a sister practice this year. So a practice that's a separate entity, but all of the sort of resources and employees from Move Forward are working in that entity. So it's called Heartwell Therapy, and it's specializing in couples and families, and it's all self-pay, which is why it's a separate entity. So that's been exciting to like set that up and see how that's working. And it's a different way of marketing. And
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
yeah.
So it sounds like even though you have separate locations, you really do kind of keep it unified. And when you're talking about the business, you're talking about the goals of the business for all the locations, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you do your meetings, do you do all those over Zoom or do you ever get the whole team together?
So mostly we do things over Zoom because we're so spread out, but we also try to have in-person opportunities for people to get together, like either within their own team, or like we had a 10th anniversary celebration party
Oh, cool.
a couple of months ago, so we invited everybody to have dinner, and it was really nice.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Awesome. Okay. So, people who are listening, who are thinking, I would love to get to that 7-figure mark, what are some next steps? Like, how can they follow up with you? And this is what you do consulting for, right?
Yeah, so the consulting business is called Private Practice by Design, and you can find us there, privatepracticebydesign.com, if you want to kind of check out what we're all about. I also have another one of my employees, Tiana Kelly, who helps with consulting around compliance. So she's one of those people who like nerds out on spreadsheets and chart audits and all of those kinds of things. So if you need help with compliance, either setting up a system or just, making sure your system is, working how it should be and is comprehensive, Tiana can definitely help with that. And I really love working with people who, have started a group practice and they're like, I really want to scale up and make something bigger. That's, exciting for me. And then a lot of times too, I help people go from contractors to W-2 employees because that seems to be a trend that's happening now.
Mm.
So
That's
I can
great.
help with that too.
Wonderful. And I can just say from personal experience, Allison's someone I turn to with my practice questions. So he definitely has a lot of knowledge and an ability to bring the kindness and the directness to the conversation as we kind of move forward as therapists and running a practice because there's so much involved. It's not just the business, it's who we are, as a person in our families, and you understand that aspect as well. So
Thank
yeah, yeah. So what's the best way for somebody to reach out if they're looking for some business coaching?
I would say my email address, which is it's Allison with one L at privatepracticebydesign.com.
Nice. Wonderful. I know you've been setting it up and doing good work with it. So I'm excited for you. And thank you for coming and providing some information, even for me, as I'm like, so where are we at? And how do I want to keep growing? You've helped me think about some things, and I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me.